Screen a little bit for me. Okay, so welcome. Thank you so much, y'all, for being here. And hopefully, you were able to come to the keynote and just sliding right over and spending some more time together. But if you were not at the keynote, my name's Dr. Jessica Sanchez, she, her pronouns. And today we're going to dive into touch, trust, and transformation. So, using sensate focus to restore intimacy after trauma. I am a huge fan of Sensate Focus. I've done a lot of like rebranding on my end in a sense of how it lands for me and shows up in my clinical work with trauma survivors. And so I wanted to put this presentation together in hopes that maybe it does something for you, whether you are a clinician, you are an advocate, you are an educator, and hopefully expanding just your own knowledge with Sensate Focus. And so let's dive right in. So here's the goals today to obviously for y'all to walk away with what is like understanding of sensate focus, talking about the trauma-informed guidelines behind sensate focus. We are going to go through a step-by-step exercise. We will talk about the role as a clinician, and then of course end with cultural considerations and reflection and Q&A. And I'm excited because we have a little bit more time together this time around. If you were in the keynote, I went right up until the very last second. Tess was like, "You're keeping my countdown on track." So I really appreciate you, Tess. But I'm excited to have some more time so I don't feel as rushed in this one. So gentle reminders that I just love to start with, y'all. This is a consensual experience for yourself, right? I have curated this workshop, but if it is no longer serving you or you are just over my voice, mute me, leave, do what is best for you, right? Any questions that you have, feel free to drop them in the WOVA Q&A chat that we have going on there. And like I said, because I do have some time, extra time in this workshop, I'm hoping to actually get around to Q&A questions. And if not, for some reason I were to run out of time, you will hear from me either way. So even if you send me a direct message, you email me, or I see something in the chat, I will follow up with it 100%. So again, just thank you so much for being here. Just a little bit about me. I'm not going to go over this entirely because I am assuming that you were in the keynote as well, but these are just some identities that I hold near and dear to my heart. And they absolutely show up in the work that I do with how I serve and advocate for victims and or survivors of sexual and relationship violence. As a student affairs practitioner turned faculty, especially in the higher education world, I have over a decade of experience there. Before I was faculty, I was the director of student advocacy services at UT Arlington, and one of my programs that I oversaw was the relationship violence and sexual assault prevention program. And it was such an honor to rebrand that program, really just basically taking it all down what they had before and rebranding it in its entirety and being able to restore trust with our student body on that campus of where they actually knew where to report, any sexual harassment, stalking, sexual assault, dating violence, etc. And I was so fortunate to also work under leadership at the time that believed survivors, one, and believed in the work that I was doing. And so I was really able to implement some amazing change with my team and around advocacy for survivors at UT Arlington. And that hasn't stopped just because I transitioned to the faculty world. I am in the College of or School of Social Work at UTA, and I love expanding future social workers' understanding of one, what social work is, but two, all of the endless possibilities that come with social work. I hear all the time, wait, Dr. Jessica, I can be a sex therapist or I could be a sex educator. You absolutely can. And so I love to just bring in that human sexuality perspective, right in the classroom. And also what I was talking about earlier, like when we talk about trauma-informed care, how are we also, right, treating the entire body, not just from the neck up, but planting that seed early as well for scholars is a huge passion of mine. And I don't call my students, I call them scholars. That came from one of my undergrad professors. The Reverend, Dr. Reverend Brown, he would walk in and always say, "Good morning, scholars." And it just made me feel so empowered to be in his class. And it stuck with me, right? And now I do it with my scholars. And so if you are an educator, I welcome you to use that term too, because my scholars will say, you don't call us students, you call us scholars, but I like it. And so it's still landing till this day. So I share that with you. And then if you're a firstborn on this call, if I have any other firstborns, my little joke is that we can trauma bond together, right? But this identity right now as a firstborn, just the space that I'm taking up, this feels really comfortable to me. This is a place where my body, I've been here before in various ways throughout my lived experience. And so this being behind the screen, being the leader right here in this energy and space feels good. Okay, so I want to really make sure that I have time for questions. So, you know what, we might circle back to this, but I'm going to skip it for now. But what I was going to do here was a sacred pause of just really setting some intention, and we'll kind of still do it. We're just not going to do a full mindful meditation right now, but really giving yourself a moment, couple seconds to think about like, why are you here? You had all these other workshops to choose from for the first round. And what made you want to come to this workshop? And so maybe that's you just embodying that feeling of why you chose this. Maybe that's you giving some more thought of like, why am I here? Maybe that's you naming right in this space that, I've never heard about sensate focus, and this is an opportunity to lean into some new knowledge. But just taking a sacred pause, this just moment to think about why you are here, being in the present as much as possible, feeling connected, right here and as a collective community in this workshop, and just naming what your intention is for the next hour and a couple minutes together. Okay. So I want to start first with kind of going over the effects of sexual trauma. I had these slides prior and just literally copy and pasted into here, but I think it's important to revisit this information because again, when we think about trauma-informed care, victim-centric care, we don't tend to name human sexuality as a part of that form, of care or a bullet point in those words. And so with that, when we think of what's coming out at the research level, but then also what our clients are telling us, right? We are in a space where I can confidently assume that we all believe people's lived experiences here. And so when a victim and or survivor is telling us this has happened to their body, we are believing that. But research is also backing that up and saying, yeah, here's the effects of sexual trauma and when something happens to someone's body that they did not consent to. And so we see responses can vary with any form, right, of sexual contact, which touching, kissing, nudity, flirting, initiation of any type of sexual behavior, and of course more, because it's going to depend also on one's definition of how does that land with them, in a sexual context, right? Or context way of things. So they could add to this, to their own list of what they identify as also sexually, driven behaviors and whatnot. Moving forward, research is still telling us that when something happens to the body that someone did not consent to, there's sexual concerns that can include low sexual desire, post-traumatic incident, sexual arousal problems, pain during sex, difficulty with orgasm and or just experiencing pleasure overall. There can be an emotional and behavioral avoidance. There can be dissociative symptoms, and of course, much more. Now, I want to pause here real quick because this is usually when I'm in an in-person environment doing this, I always will get one hand, never fails in the in-person environment. I will get one hand, and someone will ask me, well, Jessica, what about the victim that decides to sleep with start to explore their sexuality more post-traumatic incident and, that they're sleeping with multiple people. And what I hear this person asking me, right, is coming from more than likely a place of where they are projecting what they deem is appropriate for someone's healing journey. And so really they're probably projecting their own personal bias, right? In a sense of, well, if I were to go through this, or when I went through this, I didn't decide to do that. And so why would they decide to do that? And so I really just want to create intentional space to name in this moment, right? That even if a reported sexual concern was on behalf of, a victim coming forward and being like, yeah, well now like I actually feel like an uptick in my libido and I actually want to explore more. Y'all, when we are being sex positive clinicians and advocates and educators, one, we are meeting our client right where they are at. And two, in that moment, what I'm hearing them say, right, is I am exploring and this is a part of the healing journey. And so the only thing that I am concerned with is one, is it consensual? Okay. Two, what does birth control look like? Especially if I am working with a woman and I'm like, hey, do we want to have babies right now? Or are we going to use birth control? What are we doing? And then three, also keeping up on our sexual health and testing, right? I am not here. We are not here to deem what is, appropriate for someone's sexual healing journey. And I think it's important to definitely name that because, like I said, if we were in person, not saying in this space, but like I always get just like that one hand, and I always appreciate it so much because it's such a courageous question to ask. And, it goes back to like, well, if you have a question, I'm sure someone else has a similar question, right? And so, totally valid. And I'm always appreciative, but I can always guarantee that one person will ask me that. And I answered just like I answered right here. So, naming that we are not here to deem what is appropriate on someone's healing journey, right? And it could absolutely be that they actually want to explore their sexuality more, or they want to start diving into different areas. Maybe it's BDSM, right? And as long as it's consensually driven, that birth control, right, has been discussed. That STI, health, we've kind of covered that in a sense too. Those are really the things that I'm concerned about, and I will continue to support my client, right, and meet them where they're at. Okay, and then effects of sexual trauma continue. So post-assault may challenge or create new views on the following. So views on how sexual relationships, like how those are, defined and moving forward in that person's life, what's deemed as appropriate sexual behavior, how their sexual self-esteem and sexual self-efficacy is now showing up for them. Even their desire around sexual activities can shift sexual intimacy and overall satisfaction. I also added in here the essentially the neurological and physiological effects. So trauma dysregulates our nervous system, which can cause hyperarousal, dissociation, overall shutdown. Any of that can, ebb and flow there. We have the psychological effects, that shame, avoidance can result in sexual pain, desire discrepancies. I always say, like shame and guilt thrive in silence. And what, seeing that shame is the first word here with the psychological effects of how that can continue to grow, right? Especially when someone feels like they can't use their voice or they don't have a courageous and brave environment that is supportive of their healing journey. And then last but not least, the attachment and relational safety, right? So unstable relational connection can negatively impact sexual functioning. And again, just the overall human connection for a survivor, and depending on what that looks like for them for their relational safety and attachment. Okay, so we've highlighted quickly the effects of sexual trauma. So let's dive into now what sensate focus is. So, developed by Masters and Johnson in 1970, Sensate Focus is a non-demand experiential touching sequence to reduce anxiety and restore connection. Okay, so Johnson and Masters came up with this. And y'all, no research is perfect. That's a beautiful thing about research. As a researcher myself, I'm looking at people's research and I'm looking where the deficit is. And that's when you go and you try to rectify the deficit or you try to improve that research, right? And so no one's perfect. So I want to name that because if you start to really dive into sensate focus, you're going to see, again, other researchers challenge Masters and Johnson. And one of the biggest challenges is when they were developing sensate focus, they were only working with heterosexual married couples who identified as white and they were highly educated and more than likely, right, fell into like the, middle class, upper middle class for socioeconomic status. That can, it's a huge bias, right? When your research is only assessing one specific community slash population. And so that has been one of the things that is a huge challenge to this research of not being inclusive and intersectional, and it is 100% valid. So a lot of researchers have started to rewrite what sensate focus is and how that shows up in this setting. But sensate focus overall, y'all, was the centerpiece of their therapeutic work, right? So when they started working with these couples, they were noticing that these couples were having anxiety around performance. And so that's how sensate focus essentially was born by Virginia and William. So important to acknowledge the history of it. Equally, if not even more important, to acknowledge that there has been a lot of pushback on their research, right? Because of the limited community population that they were working with and serving. So continue as it's moved forward with other sex researchers in the field. We started to see a little bit of definitions, but that they're all almost saying the same thing, interconnected. So sensate focus is a hierarchy of structured touching and discovery suggestions. It can be a diagnostic and therapeutic tool for identifying psychological and relationship factors that contribute to sexual difficulties and for teaching new skills to overcome said problems to foster more meaningful sexual intimacy. And so, one thing about sensate focus, y'all, and I put this in like the workshop description, is I want you to remember that this practice and exercise that we're going to go over today, it can be done as a solo practice or as a coupled practice. And I think that is the one thing that I hands down appreciate about it the most is I am a therapist that is here for women. I only work with folks who identify as women. I will randomly take on couples at times, and they usually tend to be heterosexual couples. And I'm very intentional about who I will say yes to. But I am here for women's pleasure, period. I am here for women reclaiming their pleasure, their bodily autonomy, their agency, etc. Okay. And so that's why I love this tool and I get passionate about sharing how Sensate Focus can be a positive addition to your toolkit because it can be done as a solo practice. Now, what I've created for you today is based on a coupled practice. Okay. But just please know that this can be done in a solo space. Okay. Continuing on. So, utilization of sensate focus. Here we go. Health professionals have continued to apply this exercise, y'all, to a wide variety of sexual distresses of psychological, medical, and combined etiologies. It has been used to assist individuals with chronic pain, cancer survivors, sexual trauma survivors, and individuals battling addiction. Last but not least, it pairs well with therapeutic approaches. So if you are a clinician here today and you love working with some CBT, this may work really well for you. If you use systemic therapy, even somatic therapy, absolutely, or mindfulness CBT, as well as other medical approaches to intervention, this more than likely will complement your therapeutic work that you're already doing. I also love it because it takes me as a woman of color, as a Latina who is very passionate about incorporating ancestral healing practices into my own healing. This allows me to reiterate my mind, body, soul connection with my spirit guides, my ancestors, and how that shows up for me. Okay. And that is because I get to work specifically with my body. And so if that speaks to you again, this will be something that could be a great complement to already the work that you're doing. But I want you to keep in mind an intention with this slide is letting you know that yes, it's working with trauma survivors. It's also working with all these other communities too. And as you see, chronic pain, cancer, addiction, all of these direct realities, lived experiences around the body, right? What it means to be, practicing mindfulness while battling chronic pain, what it means to be practicing mindfulness as you are in your chemo, sessions, right? What it means to be in, tuned with your body and mindfulness as you are navigating your healing journey as a trauma survivor. So all these different communities are reporting, hey, Sensate Focus is it's working for us in these fields. Okay, so there are six core principles to sensate focus. We're going to go over each one here, starting with number one. So the core principle of sensate focus, it's non-demand and it's non-goal oriented touch. So focus is not on intercourse, orgasm, performance, or success, but it is solely on experiencing touch and being in the present. Okay. Y'all, this is so important to embody because it's going to show up in the way you even describe this exercise to a client or a couple, right? It's going to impact the type of language that you use to create that trust and rapport and the reiteration to your client that you have zero expectation. Because again, we don't talk about enough about the power dynamics that we have as clinicians and clients, or as a medical provider and a patient. Okay. Think about when you go to the doctor. You go to the doctor, and it can be a very like, okay, I'm going to show up and ask my questions and practice vulnerability. But then I really have to take for like face value what I am told because society tells me since they are the doctor, they know best for me. Okay. And if, especially if I am a woman, a trauma survivor who is already like throat chakra is not as vibrant, maybe self-worth, self-confidence is a little low, more than likely, I'm not going to self-advocate if I don't necessarily agree with what that doctor prescribes for me or suggests in the next steps of my healing, right? And so there is a power dynamic at play. And we have to remember that of the power that of language that we're using, how our clients even look at us. And y'all, when I am bringing in sensate focus, I think this is like the most raw and transparent version they almost get of Jessica as their therapist because I am letting them know there is zero expectations on this of like I am meeting you exactly where you are at, and every single win is a win here, right? And this is going to make more sense as we walk through the activity, okay? But this is a core principle, like non-goal oriented touch. You are letting them know that the focus is solely on them, their feelings, their touch, and them being present, okay? To even reduce any anxiety around, wait, but like, I don't want to experience pleasure right away. That's not what this is about. This is about you being present. This is about you being able to be connected with how touch feels against your body, and then being able to process either with your person or back in therapy, how was this for you? Okay, so core principle number one. Number two, this is sensory and mindful awareness at its like prime, I would say, encouraging both partners to attend to sensations, i.e., the textures, temperature, pressure, movement, without judgment or evaluation. Again, I've created this presentation today as if it's going to be a coupled exercise, but again, same applies for a soloed practice. So encouraging just the person to attend to sensations, right, of how something feels on their body to reestablish that mind, body, soul connection. Okay. Number three, gradual and staged progression. We are not rushing. There is no timeline. We can't even see the finish line. We are meeting our client exactly where they are at, and we are honoring them every single step of the way. So starting with non-sexual, like stages of this exercise, non-erotic contact, and we will gradually reintroduce sexual or erotic touching, contact, of course, depending on comfort, because consent is at the forefront. So this is going to be a 5-stage exercise that you're going to see today and the way that it's presented to you. But you are going to see that I'm very intentional about naming. There is no kissing. There is no orgasm here. That is not the goal. Okay. And again, providing you verbiage to reiterate to your client what we're doing and what the goals are, right, of this exercise. Oh, it flipped out. Oh, we'll just put all three of these up here, y'all. Number four, communication, consent, and mutuality. We're open sharing between partners about comfort, boundaries, likes, dislikes. Consent remains central and ongoing. Number five, we are attempting to reduce anxiety associated with our body and or possibly, right, if we're doing it with someone that we trust, by shifting attention from performance or outcome to sensation and connection. The technique reduces self-consciousness and performance anxiety. That's exactly why Masters and Johnson created this. And then last but not least, flexibility and trauma-informed pacing. So as you see today, I feel like this is a very like modern adaptation because you're getting kind of the way that I facilitate this. And I will attach again the Cornell Health five-stage process, but that you can see that there's going to be more time, stages can be repeated, adjustments for safety in the environment, or again, trying to create a courageous and brave environment as much as possible. Y'all also too, like with the word safety, right? Like that is one word where I try to really be intentional with how it is being used, especially as us and practitioners that work in the field of advocacy for victims and or survivors. We know that safety is, gosh, that can be hard to create, right? And so I always cringe when I hear people say, like, this is a safe environment, but it's like they just started a presentation and I'm like, you don't know me and I don't know you. And I don't know how you contract for safety and vice versa, right? And like, I need way more time than an hour with you to feel like I could be safe. So I always try to reframe that, right? Around courageousness, braveness, especially giving consideration that we know a lot of harm has been reported that happens, right? In one of the places that a survivor would have deemed the most safest for them at that time. Okay. So very cognizant again, power of language. Okay. So that is our six core principles here. Okay. That are guiding us through this process. Our trauma-informed guidelines look a little bit like this. Consent leads at every single stage of this process, no matter what. We are avoiding sexual scripts that mimic trauma dynamics. You are only going to know what that, sounds like, feels like, for your client after trust and rapport has been built, right? And you may not even learn everything about that piece. But if you are familiar with that, avoiding that as much as possible. Stop, signal, and pause agreements that will make sense a little bit later as we walk through each stage. And then, of course, creating intentional, safe, brave, courageous environments. Okay, let me get a drink of water real quick. Awesome. So now we're going to walk through a step-by-step sensate focus exercise, and this version is going to be partnered. Okay. So first, before we start, y'all are going to go on your own little scavenger hunt. So I want you in your space that you're in, find one or two items in your home slash office, or wherever you are at that make you curious about how they would feel on your bare skin. And you'd be like, Jessica, what? Yep, I know that's the only kind of guidance I'm going to give right now. But look around your space, find one or two items that just make you curious and really honor that curiosity. If you see something that's textured and it makes you be like, I wonder what that would feel like. I just want you to honor that and like pick up that item. So I'm going to give you like 30 seconds, 45 seconds. I don't want you to get anxiety with this. And I'm hoping that I can see. Okay. I'm in our chat on the Wolva app so I can see. All right, y'all. So if anyone wants, I'll share first. Okay. Let me match your all's vulnerability and I appreciate the chat going up here. So you want to know what I chose? Okay. First curiosity, fork. I'm at my parents' house, so not usually my normal environment, right? I'm home visiting for the holidays. But me and my client, we're working with Sensei Focus right now, and she told me, she's like, my husband brought a fork the other night, and she's like, and I loved it. And I said, oh, I'm gonna add that to my list of like one of my go-tos. So I went and picked up a fork, and then I was walking by the counter and I saw this postcard and or like this little card and it caught my eye with how sharp the corners are and I was like, ooh, that would do something for my skin. So y'all drop in the chat, what are one or two items that you just found? I want to live through you. What do y'all got over there? Let's see. I'm pretty sure I have the chat pulled up in the app, but then I see a message here.
can also read them out if you'd like.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Tess.
Yeah, of course. So I'm seeing in the chat, and I can volunteer myself to go first because I answered. I have a very clicky fidget, which is kind of sharp and
Ooh,
pointy. And so I have
okay.
that. Then we have salt lamp, Velcro, a fleece blanket, a cloth napkin, a
Mm.
little fidget with a mop-like head,
Oh.
blanket, textured pillow, feather, a crystal, a sparkly ornament, a magnet giraffe for
Ooh.
paper clips. I want to see that, Gabby.
Oh. I love it. Thank you so much, Tess. Okay, I'm also thinking of like this sparkly ornament. Like if this person uses it, maybe you'll have sparkles all over. Okay, y'all, thank you so much. So we did our little scavenger hunt. We have our items. Okay, so this is how I start with this exercise. Again, you're going to get the Cornell Health PDF of Sensate Focus, but nothing's perfect. And I felt like there should be additional steps created before we dive right in. So this is what I do. First, I cannot reiterate enough how important it is with creating the environment. Mind you, the work that I do with my client, we have navigated the pleasure scavenger hunt before we've introduced Sensate Focus. So I've learned some things about them. They have learned things about themselves for the first time, or maybe reiterations of how much they did love something and they've brought it back into their life because it provides them that much pleasure. But I really like we talk through, we name, we write down what does Jessica need in order to create an environment where her body is going to feel brave, courageous, maybe safe if that lands for her, and that she's going to be able to be present and do this exercise, right? So I walk through with my client. Do we need a certain smell? Do we need candles lit? Do we need low lighting? Do we need red lighting? Do we need a certain pillow? Do we need, right? Are we not even comfortable in the bedroom? Do we need to start in the living room? Do we need to start in the office, right? Do we need to do this somewhere where I'm not even thinking about right now, but creating such an intentional environment that allows our bodies to show up? Is there essential oils involved, right? Is it even before this, before my client even creates the environment, they're going to take a bath in order to relax their body, right? And that environment's going to look completely different than this one. But I'm reiterating that the environment is so important. So then your client feels courageous to show up to perform this exercise. Dr. J's next first step, reiteration of goals. We can more than likely you will go through the stage one with your client, right? In your session, just like I do. But I reiterate there is actually like no goals if her client does not want any goals to be set, right? Because every single win is a win. Your client showing up and being vulnerable and even participating with one or two right items, that's a win. Okay. And so reiteration of goals, if we want goals there, if we don't want any goals, if we just want to, if the goal is we're just going to go with the flow, that's what we're honoring and naming. Okay. So then as we move forward into actual step one here, and again, you could Google Sensate Focus and you're going to get a lot of different variations. And so step one is non-genital, non-breast slash chest touch. Okay, so we're taking any pressure off of the genitalia and again, breast, chest area. And then this is where I add, this is a Dr. J add, and or anywhere on the body that is a trauma zone. Okay, so I do a body mapping exercise with my client to learn from them. Is there any other areas of the body that they identify as a trauma zone? I think about the neck. If are a survivor of a domestic violence, relationship, and there was always choking happening at times, or whatever someone's lived experience, but honoring that if there's other parts that are identified as a trauma zone, we need to make sure that we're not touching that area in the beginning. Okay. So this is how it moves. Client focus. We are reiterating to our client, you are feeling the sensations. Really be in tune if there's already temperature play happening, if there's texture. I remember hearing Velcro. Okay, someone's got Velcro and pressure of physical touch slash impact on their body. So you're like, okay, Jessica, you got these, we have these items. This is the client focus. So this is how it works. Remember, I'm working as if this is a partnered exercise. So there is going to be a giver and a receiver. Again, because you're working with your client, it is whatever your client wants. They will decide whether they want to be the receiver first or the giver to their partner. If they decide they want to be the receiver, you would then instruct them, okay, you created this environment where hopefully your body is able to show up and be fully present. Get into a position that feels best for you, whether you want to be seated or you want to be lying down. And they present to step one, y'all, in whatever clothing feels best to them. Okay. You will have clients that are ready, fully nude, ready to go. You're going to have clients that want to be in sweatpants, socks, and maybe a sports bra, right? We are honoring whatever feels best to their body. The instruction here is you will take one of the items, whoever the giver is, will take one of the items that has been selected on the scavenger hunt, and any bare exposed skin that is not identified as a trauma zone, right? So right now on my body, my forearms and elbows are exposed. My neck and face are exposed. A little bit of my belly is exposed. And then my ankles. If I was doing this right now and I was the receiver, my partner would take my fork and they would start putting that fork along my face. And I invite you to do the same. Take your item and any exposed skin that you have. I want you to start rubbing that item gently over your bare skin. And how does it feel? Are there some places that it feels good and you want to stay in that same area over and over? Do you want to apply pressure with the item that you have to give you a different sensation? Using my fork, I can definitely tell the difference, right? If I put more pressure on and how that feels. Lighter pressure, y'all, almost causes frizzen for me. This is actually a good one. Good item for me. So you're seeing in the moment how this would work. Right now, you are literally doing sensate focus to yourself and letting your body and brain know this feels good or this doesn't feel good. And I want to move on to the next item. And so this is stage one. You're literally doing stage one. You're doing it as a solo practice, or maybe you have your person with you and we didn't know that, and they're doing it for you, and you're getting to be completely relaxed, hopefully. But this is what you would do. So they would take turns. One person is the receiver, one person is the giver. I always have each person go find 5 items with their own little scavenger hunt, or they can make it a date night. Okay. Again, if you're working with a couple and I say go to the Dollar Tree, right? And just go through the aisles and do separate shopping and don't be with each other because again, we're honoring the curiosity. Ooh, that item, I'm curious how that would feel against my skin. And we come home, someone is the receiver, someone is the giver. They take all the items and they go through. And whoever is receiving, right? And again, if it's your client, they're really focused on sensation for them, how this is feeling on their body. And this is a crucial stage because this is where they're starting to really develop that throat chakra. And they're going to start reporting out to their person, hey, that feels good, or I want you to pass. Can you move on to the next part of my body, or can you move on to the next item as a whole? Right? So this is where that communication is going to start to develop. So, gentle reminder here, touching for your own experience. You're not to please your partner. So, again, in the receiver mode, if I receive, and then I'm done, and now it's my partner's turn, I'm to give to them, right? But still touching for my own experience in that moment of getting to learn my partner's body. We're not touching for arousal. We are here to literally touch for sensation and being present in the moment. Again, consent driven always. And we are not touching any of the genitalia. We are not touching the breast or chest area. And we are not touching any area that's been identified as a trauma zone. We're not moving on to step two until step one has been completed fully nude. So, if you decide to incorporate this, y'all, with any work with trauma survivors, know that step one can take weeks, can take months. And that is evidence-based, literally recommended. Like you are doing step one correctly, your client is doing it correctly. If it's taking them a couple times, if it's taking them an extended period of time. But every little win is a win, right? Like a win is your client coming back and saying, "Hey, we did this and these were the clothes that I wore and I was able to say like these two items felt good but I didn't like these other three." That's a win. Another win sounds like, "Hey, I did it again and this time I was able to take off my shirt but I still kept my pants on, my socks on, my bra on and like but it felt good and I was able to swap out this item for this." We're increasing that, right? That body mind connection. We're increasing self-confidence. We're developing communication here. Those are wins every step of the way. Kissing and sex are completely off limits. We're not doing anything like that because we are focused on being in the present and on sensations. Okay. And then this is where it's like your turn, my turn, right? So receiver and then giver and then switching on stage one. And then again, step one can take weeks or months to complete. And that's beautiful in itself. We are not here to rush anyone's process. It is consent driven by our client. We are meeting them where they are at. Okay, so steps two comes in mutual touching without sexual intent. Kissing and sex are still off limits. Okay, your turn, my turn, still fully happening here. So we can touch genitals, chest and breast area, and trauma zones. Again, if it's consent led, right? If our client is to a space where they're like, "You know what? I am okay with my chest area being touched, but I would still like to avoid my vulva." Awesome. Sounds great. Can't wait for you to do this, as self, or can't wait for you to do this again with your partner. And I look forward to seeing you next week and we'll process more on how this was for you. But no, right, that we have more of a body map here that we're literally working with because areas that were not deemed essentially that we were maximizing on in stage one are now available in step two. Arousal can be acknowledged, but it's not the goal of the toucher, right? This is still very much, we are focused on the sensation, especially because now genitals and chest area, right, are available. So these are new sensations coming to us. Okay. Very vulnerable sensations as well as we are reiterating the body mind connection. Receiver remains in control of speed, stroke, and pressure of touch. So again, our voice, your client's voice is absolutely still being developed here, right? They are communicating out, "Hey, that feels really good. Can you please repeat that stroke for me? Hey, I really want you to focus more on my back because that's where I'm feeling the most sensations and it feels really good. Hey, I don't like that item. Can you please move forward to the next one?" Right? And so this is how stage two, we're basically incorporating the whole body. And remember, since we didn't move forward to step two until step one was done fully nude. Okay, so this is where that nude energy continues to come into. But again, if the client wants to start with their favorite t-shirt on and shorts on, right? That's beautiful. We can start there and knowing that it will end more than likely in that nude era, right? Because that's where we ended with step one. And now we're in step two and we are progressing. And then hopefully this is where that emotional closeness, physical attunement, especially if it's between two people, is really starting to grow even more. Stage one is the foundation, stage two or step one, and then step two is where it starts to flourish even more. Okay, step three. So now we're going to enhance sensory awareness here. Kissing and sex, still off limits. Okay. Your turn, my turn energy, still happening. We can touch genitals, chest and breast area and trauma zones. Again, more than likely, your client is evolving, getting more comfortable with their body. Again, may present fully nude right away or kind of wants to take their time getting back to that place. And then we can add, please, some lotion or warm massage oil to start to add in this sensory awareness component, right? We can incorporate a blindfold if that feels appropriate or a different, right, fabric to essentially take away that auditory sensory. We could incorporate some of their favorite food. One thing I love to do at the end of my sound baths is when folks wake up, they always have an affirmation card and then a piece of Dove chocolate on their mat, right? And I will walk them through or talk them through, right, a mindfulness, essentially eating activity to reconnect their body coming out of the sound vibrations and being kind of fully more present, right, with that taste of the candy in their mouth. Same energy here. If your client's favorite, is gummy bears. Okay, so what does it mean to incorporate that food, right? The gummy bears, the taste aspect, while having some of their favorite, items, whether it's the fork or it's the, Christmas ornament, also being rubbed on their body at the same time. Okay. And then incorporation of sound. So is it their favorite song? Is listening to, mindfulness or an empowering, woman's song or sound bowls, right? So anything to just incorporate, enhance this sensory awareness in step three. Step four, mutual touching. So kissing of the lips and sex are still off limits. Notice that kissing switched up here. At first, it just said kissing was off limits, but it says kissing of the lips and sex are still off limits. Okay. So we're removing also the your turn, my turn. And then now we're implementing the new knowledge that both of them have gained about sensory awareness of self and their partner, right? Because they were increasing their own body mind connection for self, but then also learning what their partner likes, dislikes, etc. And communication and trust are at the forefront. So hopefully, if everything has been going smoothly, the communication and trust have started to evolve and have been built, right? In stages 1 through 3. Now it's flourishing in stage 4. Incorporate oral stimulation to centrally explore partner's body. So this is where the kissing of the lips and sex are off limits. So we're not kissing each other on the lips, but you can absolutely use your mouth to kiss their shoulder, to kiss their chest, to kiss their neck. You could add in your own breath, right? Which is going to be hot more than likely, or breathing on them to provide different sensation. Obviously, you could use tongue as well, right? To provide a different, like a lubricated, obviously, feeling. So no kissing of the actual lips, but kissing an exploration of the body. Yes. Because again, sex arousal, that's not our goal right now. Consider changing the environment in step 4. Living room to bedroom, bedroom to shower, bedroom to home office. Or maybe your client's like, no, I love it right in my bedroom and that's where we're going to keep it. Absolutely. We're honoring that, right? That's a win too, because they know exactly what feels good to them and that their body is giving them even more, right, of that affirmation of this is where I feel good. And then last but not least, step 5 is the sensual intercourse. And again, it's been jointly decided. Both partners are consenting to this. Um, and so implement what you know about self and partner, of course, right? All the expanded new knowledge that's been gained. We recommend like a position that allows for genital contact slash stimulation. And so think about like missionary tends to be a solid position. Both are active participants. There is no my turn, your turn, right? Again, this is both bodies meeting each other where they're at. Slow penetration, intentional pause to feel, then resume. That is probably one of, the most like detailed notes to make about step 5 is if there is, again, jointly decided that some type of intercourse is going to happen, the intentional pause to feel what does that feel like when there has been any form of penetration, to feel what those sensations are in that very moment. And then communication and trust remain at the forefront. Y'all, one special note to make here on step 5. When we are thinking penetration, it could be penetration of the finger. It could be penetration of the tongue. It could be vaginal penile penetration. It could be the use of a pleasure toy for penetration, right? And so that is going to be jointly decided between your client and the person that they're doing this with, okay? But we're not just going right to vaginal penile. There's so much more penetration options that can happen. And again, it's your client is driving. They are in the driver's seat and everyone, therapist, partner is meeting them exactly where they are at. So for the post reflection after each stage, y'all, because like I said, stage one, step one, that could take your client weeks of repeated, right, of attempts and shifts and pivoting of what learning what they like. And so after each experience, they are always doing some type of post reflection. Again, if this is in a coupled space, you could, encourage the pillow talk, right? Of both of them reflecting out how was this for each of them? What did they learn about themselves? But always going back to my client, right? And providing them in one word, describe how it was for you. And like, why does that one word come up? In particular. Ask them what went well, and I'll tell my clients, do a voice note, do a journaling activity, whatever speaks to you, whatever's best. Send the email, whatever is going to allow them to release and be able to discuss more about how this experience was. Learning about what they want to change for next time. What did they feel the most during this exercise? Where did they feel that in their body? Of course, any other questions that you want to add to this list. But these are some that I will ask them to just think about, right? And again, they can answer all of them or they can answer none of them, or they answer one, whatever feels appropriate for them and their body. Here, I just wanted to share some pictures from I did a sensate focus activity with a bunch of folks and it was so much fun. And you see here I had set up like a little sensate focus bar and I did like nail files and toothpicks and matches and there were like the little appetizer sticks and you see feathers and so they went through and they each made their own little sensate focus bag of the items that spoke to them and then partnered up and learned some new things about themselves in that very moment. Let's talk about the therapist role here in this. So, validation and permission is the biggest thing within Sensate Focus and how you're working with your client. So I wanted to provide, like there's no behind schedule in this process, right? Like you are truly empowering your client to meet themselves exactly where they are at and reiterating that you are going to be right here to support them every moment of the way, right? And you'll be ready to process with them, you will go through each stage prior as they progress and, process, flush out loud, like what feels good to them as you're reading through the document together and what doesn't already feel good to them or what changes need to be made, right, in order for them to be able to feel more present in their environment. And then the desexualization of touch, right? So I think the stages and the way that I've made it here do a pretty good job at like, this is not, the goal is not arousal. The goal is not orgasm. The goal is not any type of penetrative, sex until stage five. And so desexualizing touch, we're focusing on the sensation, you're focusing on the body's reaction, you're focusing on your feelings and how this feels for you to reestablish that body mind connection. Hopefully, tapping into a strengths-based perspective with your client, and then, of course, meeting them where they are and honoring every single win. I can't shy away from that enough of like honoring every win, even when they come back saying this didn't work for me, right? And this is what I want to change, or I need to take a pause here with at this step, like that is a win because they are reclaiming their voice as well in this process. And even if it's vocalizing out to you, right, or possibly their partner, that this is what they need more of, that is a win. It makes my heart so full, like even just speaking about it out loud and thinking of clients in the very moment of how these wins all show up in beautifully complex different ways. And then cultural and identity considerations, right? So with Sensate Focus, I think it's and Sensate Focus isn't something that you're recommending in your first session, right? Like you are absolutely building the trust and rapport with them in order to eventually bring this in. And so you would more than likely, with that trust and rapport being successfully developed, you're going to possibly know about intergenerational trauma that exists for this person in their body. Maybe an experience with religion and how that's showing up for them present, but also in the past. Cultural narratives that could absolutely be also impacting how they are experiencing trauma, right? Around gender, ethnicity, language, experience with sex education. We talked about that today a little bit. Distrust with systems slash providers, depending on how that has been for them. I think about LGBTQ plus community. I think about the disability community on how this exercise would need to be maybe adapted, right? Like to be way more like queer inclusive, or hey, I cannot feel sensation on my left side of my body, right? And so like we need to be able to come up with other inclusive ways to make sure that this activity is still a success for them. And then postpartum care, maternal health, right? I think about how that experience can absolutely impact someone's healing journey as well. And then reflection for yourself, right? Like, what does safe touch feel like in your body right now? Especially after experiencing this today for yourself. Just giving you a couple moments to think about that. Especially because you maybe were already, sharing or using one of your scavenger hunt items, and just a reflection for you of what does safe touch feel like for me right now in my body. So just giving you a moment to think about that. And then I did not get to go over these in my keynote because I was going so fast. But same affirming resources here are listed. You will see I really admire Dr. Brado's work. Better Sex Through Mindfulness. She has some really great mindfulness exercises in this book. And her work is specifically with cancer survivors. So if you haven't read that book, I would definitely encourage you to pick that up and add that to your library. And then I tried to break them down into topics around mindfulness, erotica, body education, focus on clinical sex therapy, radical pleasure, decolonizing mental health and the body, trauma science driven reads, one around desire, and then ending the same way, y'all, as I ended earlier with like gentle reminder, right? I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And by Maya Angelou. And yes, again, reiterating what I said earlier, that we absolutely remember how folks made us feel. But as someone, just like many of you in this space that work with trauma survivors and take it a step further with asking them how intimacy and pleasure is showing up for them, how even human connection is showing up for them. They don't forget when they are asked the first time, right, by that one provider that kind of goes above and beyond, but really we're just providing more inclusive and intersectional trauma informed care. And I hear so many times, like, oh, you're the first to ask me about this, right? And so I already know that I have folks with me right in this space that have been the first for many as well. And so I appreciate you so much. And let's keep pouring that positive energy out into the universe together, and transforming the lives of trauma survivors. And then, of course, right, just reiterating what I said earlier too, that your pleasure absolutely matters. And even in this space today, if you are like, you know what? I need to start first with some sensate focus for me and like reconnect with your body through touch, and even incorporating the pleasure scavenger hunt from earlier, right? Or even if just like that quick 30 to 45-second practice, I had my fork over here and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, I really like this. I'm adding this fork, y'all. But that was just like my arms. And also, two of the most erogenous zones on our body that are the most neglected are between your elbows and behind your knees. So pay attention to that a little bit. And I felt that immediately today with kind of like the edge of the fork and going between my elbow. So I hope that this did something again for you, that it's a tool that you'll be able to add to your toolkit. Even for my educators in this space, you saw how I had kind of, paired up folks, right? And was able to do this as like a live community workshop. And so it could even be done with something like that, or a couples workshop on reiterating, right? Communication, trust, meeting, your person where they are at, you do it with your best friend, meeting your best friend where they are at, both honoring each other's bodies, and moving forward from there, and increasing your self-confidence, your throat chakra, your voice, right? And being able to communicate out what you need for your body. So I think I finally get to tap in and do questions. Do I have time, Tess? Oh,
I'm muted. So sorry. Yes, you do. You have about 15 minutes to take
oh, awesome.
questions. Excellent.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
wonderful. I'm seeing one that's in the chat already from Amanda. Amanda would like to know, do you work with people who don't have a consistent partner but want to become more open when that time comes?
Yes, absolutely. So actually, predominantly, a lot of my clients are single. And so we're doing this practice just as a solo practice, and it doesn't really change. I will say probably the one downfall, right, is when we're doing this as a solo, and I've done it as a solo practice on myself, is I get access right to the front of my body, but then it can be hard when you're trying to do your back or like your neck. But I also like was like, well, let me get a longer feather, you know? And so again, you pivot and you can make it work, but I was still able to do, right? Again, back of my thighs and my behind my knee and down to my ankle. And again, that's with my body's movement as well. So yes, you can absolutely do this in a solo practice with some probably minor adjustments. And that's why I also say too, right? Like when we say coupled, it could be with your best friend, like someone that you trust, right? And so I've even had one client where like it started as a solo and then she was like, okay, I'm feeling like really good with this. I'm going to ask my bestie because I trust them if they would join me and then I can do this more. And it totally helped her develop her voice even more, right? With like communicating out with someone that she trusts and being able to develop that confidence too. So yeah, besties included, please. Or like siblings, right? Like someone that you trust and yeah, in your world? Great question. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. We've got a question from Samara. What what responses have you gotten from men or mask identified folks on performance? And has there been less anxiety around performance sexually after participating in Sensei Focus?
Yeah, so I can only speak to a couple because I don't work predominantly with folks who identify as men. But I will say with the select couple of heterosexual folks that I worked with as couples, um, the men were actually reporting like the urgency to want to do it again step one, like over and over. And that was very interesting, but also not interesting when you're able to create a space for people to feel. And I think of kind of the way toxic masculinity works within our society of men not, and even mask presenting folks, like not even getting the, um, affirmation needed to explore their feelings, right? And so, yeah, I've had a very positive experience with men being like, I now know what I can go back to and like let my partner know, like, hey, I'm feeling disconnected. Can we do stage one and stage two together? Which again, like, those are not stages that there's any penetration happening, right? So I think like it really does develop again, what it's supposed to, this sense of intimacy. And then also the performance anxiety decrease a little bit in a sense of like, now that you know my body more, or like I know my body more, I feel more confident, right? And being able to perform. So I can speak a little bit, but not all the way, just because I don't work specifically with men or mask presenting folks. But great question.
Great, awesome. This touched a little bit on it already, as Jenna says in the chat, but for asexual folks or those who aren't interested in sex, can they still do this exercise with their partner for steps 1 through 4? Do you have recommendations for folks who maybe are less interested in sex?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, again, this is something like we need a document that's like, hey, I created this document because I learned about sensate focus and I realized like that's a deficit. Like naming that there is not a sensate focus activity that has been developed for folks who identify as asexual. And so I think taking the information that you've learned today, right, and applying that with someone who identifies as asexual and saying like what's feeling good and then like what is the hard boundary, right? Like what's the hard stop? Maybe it is only a stage 1 through 3 for that person, right? And they're like, that's good for me. Um, and so yeah, naming, I think it can absolutely happen. It will feel and look and sound different, and that is perfectly okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine that this would probably be pretty similar for folks who consider themselves to be stone or touch me nots as well. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
All
And I
right.
think too, right? Like even with the like folks that aren't even like big on touch, like I've worked with couples where I can tell like one even has anxiety around touch. And so I was like, hey, like let's make sure to like pick items that have a handle. So like you're not touching your person, but you're still engaged. Like you can still be, and I just remember them being like, yeah, like I can do this, because there was a disconnect. Like with the intimacy, one partner was feeling like, hey, like, are you even into me anymore? And the other person, like, no, I am. I just like this makes me feel uncomfortable. And so we made sure that every item had a handle. That way there wasn't having to be like an actual physical in the beginning.
Such a great recommendation. I love that. Thank you. There's another question. I'm going to be honest, it's from me.
Oh,
I was curious if you could talk a little bit about, you described Sensate Focus as working as an intervention for people who are solo, folks who are in a couple. Do you have any suggestions for adaptation for folks who might be in a poly relationship with multiple partners? Are there ways to do it all together? Are there ways to do it like in
yeah.
clusters? Yeah, I would just love to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I think I mean, like that's why I love Sensate Focus is one, how much it's been challenged, but how much I feel like when you get around folks who actually use this as a tool, it's like, oh, you do it that way? That's genius. And so again, it's kind of like, okay, Tess, like how many people are we talking about here, right? Like, and my heart just like got excited because I haven't necessarily had that opportunity, but I just think about my experience is like folks when I work with that are like poly, their communication is usually way more transparent and honest and vulnerability is there. That's not my experience every single time, but that's been a couple of times. And so, yeah, I just feel like boundaries, right? Like that would be at the forefront. Again, consent leaning, but nothing really changes besides, well, it sounds like we're gonna have like we got to be clear about like who wants to be receiver, who wants to be giver. Do we have a space that is big enough for all of our bodies to exist comfortably? What does every person need? Because remember we talked about environment and being crucial about creating that environment so especially a trauma survivor can show up as much as their authentic self as they can. And then when I kind of think about if it's multiple people, I'm like, ooh, okay. So like what would every person need, right? Especially if we have multiple trauma survivors in that space, and knowing more than likely we do, especially with evidence-based research, and we know this. So yeah, I think we would just have to pivot and get a little creative, right? But I think too, I think the biggest thing would be like, do we have a space big enough to make sure all the bodies are comfortable? And that, and then just really talking it through of like, hey, this is how it starts, but does it still apply to like this energy? And do we need to make any accommodations for that?
Thank you so much. That's an excellent answer.
Yeah.
I appreciate it so much. So that is all the questions that we currently have, but we do have just a little over 5 minutes left in our time. So I want to kind of encourage folks that if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat. We can read them
Yeah.
off. But yeah, this was really wonderful. I feel like I learned a whole lot. And I also learned some really
Thanks.
cool things about how this feels on my skin. So
Oh, that was so cool. I love that. And Tess, we were dropping, or I saw you like responded so beautifully in the previous keynote, and I saw such a powerful question there. So I wouldn't mind, well, they were all powerful, but I would love to kind of maybe speak to it here real quick. So there was one around like, um, I'm not saying it verbatim, but around like when someone's sexual journey did not start with consent, right? Like what had happened to them was a non-consensual experience. And so how do we support trauma survivors in that regard? And y'all, I really feel like, and it's one such a great question because it needs to be discussed more and deserves to take up way more space. But that really comes back to like the reclaiming, right, of one's autonomy and agency, but also like the importance of education there, right? That like naming that what had happened to them was harmful, um, and like was not consensual, right? And how it should like moving forward and how they are hopefully, empowered to make decisions that feel best for them. So I feel like a lot of that work is going to start with like the reclaiming of self, but also if that was someone's first experience, then more than likely there's a lot of sex education that goes into, right, that work with that person and getting questions answered that they maybe never got the opportunity to do so because they were in survival mode at possibly such an early age, kind of when I read that question. And so starting there, and just empowering, right, that person to know like any decision moving forward and even like naming that it starts in that space, like letting them know that they are in control of the therapeutic space, right? So they can feel like, oh, this is what it feels like to be in the driver's seat, but also be honored in the driver's seat, right? And so, yeah, I just like wanted to kind of share a little bit on that question because it's such a, and I'll answer it back in the keynote Q&A too. It's such a beautiful question.
That's really great. All right, we have two questions from Larissa and Isabel. They're very similar. Larissa would like to know what mental health degree path would you recommend for someone who wants to be a practitioner like yourself? They say they want to be a clinical therapist and they love your work, but they don't live in Texas. And Isabel is an MSW student who wants to know how to start working in the sex therapy field.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, awesome. Okay, so owning my bias, I am a social worker. I actually just completed my clinical hours last week. So, yeah, thank you. I will be sitting for my LCSW exam early 2026. But any mental health profession that feels best to you, do your research. There's counselors, there's social worker, there's marriage and family therapist. Because if you want to be clinical, you got to get that mental health degree, right? And so anything that's going to also, obviously, your license will complement all of the hard work that you put into your master's. And then I definitely encourage you to check out Widener. The reason why I had went to Widener University is because our curriculum is accredited with ASECT. ASECT is the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. Okay. And so so what we have this relationship with them where all of our curriculum is honored for the ASEC credentialing process. And so now that I finished one supervision, now I go spend my money on another supervisor. But because I don't say I'm a certified sex therapist because I don't hold a CST, but ASEC provides that credential. And so now my curriculum's already done because I went to Widener, right? And now I just focus on my 300 hours of clinical supervision and then I will be ASEC certified. So you could go to Widener, you could go to Michigan social work program and still look at ASECT for your certified sex therapy or certified sex educator credentials after. Also, y'all send me an email because I have a document. I try to keep track of all of our institutions across the nation that have sex therapy certificates, because there's other universities that offer just a sex therapy certificate. So maybe you don't necessarily want to do the ASECT route because it's also expensive. Let's name that, okay? And doing a sex therapy certificate at, I think it's Washington University in St. Louis, maybe that is more your route. And so that is great as well, right? So please send me an email, but yeah, focus on whatever mental health, field feels good to you. And then you'd want to look into a sex therapy certificate of some sort or ASECT supervision after. And ASECT is in Puerto Rico in June 2026. So I know I will be there. And so if anyone else goes, please stay in touch because I would love to meet up and see you.
So exciting. I did drop the ASECT website in the chat for folks, and I see also someone dropped another link for a sex education sexual health certificate as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, we're about at time, but I want to say thank you
Okay.
again so
Thank you.
much. This was such an excellent session. I'm about to drop again in the chat. There is an evaluation for today, so please fill those out, especially if you are getting continuing education credits for this conference. You need to fill out the evaluation to get those credits. But really, thank you so much for this amazing session, and we'll hopefully see folks in the next one.
Yes, thanks, Tess. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.